The belt sander is used to sand the main field of the floor for speed and aggressiveness. As much as possible, we want to keep all of the sander's wheels on a smooth, freshly cut surface. If we move from right to left, the leading left-hand wheel will always be rolling on an uncut surface, causing irregularities in the floor to be transferred back onto the floor. Always move left to right in order to keep your belt machine sanding as smooth as possible. Sanding in a forward direction removes some finish, but the backward pass in the same path creates a lot more cutting power since the machine is pulling against itself. The backward pass will help clean up the remaining finish as well as any loose wood fibers. On your first cut, sanding at a slight angle to the grain of the wood, as opposed to cutting straight on, will make your abrasive selection more aggressive. This can be advantageous since straight-on sanding may transfer unevenness at end joints where there is over and underwood. Sanding at a slight angle around 7 to 15 degrees will shave those areas down evenly. Cutting at a 45-degree angle is very aggressive and should only be used on very damaged floors such as those with severe water damage. The cross-grain scratches left from cutting at a 45 will need to be taken out with an additional straight-on cut using the same grit. Occasionally, you may have to cut at a 90-degree angle, such as in hallways or other tight areas where the flooring runs across the space. For these areas, back off on the drum pressure and use a finer grit abrasive belt. The succeeding cuts will need to be done with an edger or a multi-disc buffer. Recall that for the first cut, our goal on a resand is to remove all of the old finish, sealer, and stain, and to remove all of the over-underwood on a new install. We want to select a grit that is aggressive enough to accomplish these goals, but not overly aggressive. Usually a 50 or 60 grit belt is a good place to start. But depending on the wood species and other factors, you may need to adjust your grit selection up or down based on these trial runs. Feathering is an important concept in wood floor craftsmanship. Any machine, tool, or applicator that touches the floor should always be used with a feathering motion. In other words, easy on and easy off the floor. This keeps you from creating start and stop marks on the floor that can show through in the final product. Whenever the machine is running and the drum is in contact with the floor, it must be moving to avoid drum marks. If you do happen to leave a drum mark on the floor, immediately indicate its location with a carpenter's pencil or lumber crayon. Don't try to remember where you left them later on. These sanding marks can be removed now or later in the process. We can leave a subtle trough in the floor that can be visible when finish is applied if we do not stagger our transitions from pass to pass. To avoid this, stagger your start and stop pattern throughout the job at the wall and mid-floor transition areas. For each sanding pass, move forward and backward in the same path, then move over about half the width of the drum and repeat. Overlapping your passes in this way blends the boards and topography of the floor, and creates a flatter, smoother result overall. Sand the full length of the starting wall with the right side of the machine to the wall. This creates a fresh starting path to work on. Turn the machine around and work across the room, sanding 2/3 of the floor working towards the far wall. Then sand the full length of the far wall. Turn and sand the remaining third of the field, overlapping the mid-floor transition area. Part of the experience we provide to our customers is a virtually dust-free job site. Keeping your DCS vacuums clean and working properly will go a long way in helping you keep this promise, as well as keeping you and your employees happier and healthier during the sanding process. To properly change the DCS bag, first turn off the sanding machine, leaving the DCS unit on. Pull the DCS hose off the sander and plug the opening. Wait several seconds to allow pressure to build up in the hose. Then press the filter cleaning lever on the DCS unit to purge the coarse filter. Repeat this process if necessary, then power off the DCS unit. Unlatch the lid to the Longo bag canister and tilt it back while holding the dust bag inside, gently pulling and allowing the extra bag to release while the lid tilts back. Shake the dust from the upper part of the Longo bag, then squeeze it together at the top of the dust level. Tie it off tightly with 2 cable ties, leaving about 2 inches of space between them. Cut the bag between the cable ties, then remove the full dust bag and dispose of it properly. Be sure to store it away from the house and any vehicles until the end of the day. Fold over the loose end of the Longo bag and secure it with an additional cable tie. Don't trim the cable ties, as this might create sharp edges that can puncture the bag. Gently pull down the amount of new bag needed and tuck it down into the canister, then close and latch the lid. Turn on the unit to fully secure the new Longo bag into place. Reconnect the hose to the machine and continue sanding. The edger is used along wall edges and other detail areas not accessible by the belt sander. Working around the room in a clockwise direction will allow you to cut with the leading edge where there is more pressure, and feather with the following edge where there is less pressure. This will give you an aggressive cut without leaving deep edger swirls, which can take a lot of time to remove in subsequent stages. Likewise, working the wrong way around the room with the edger will leave heavy swirl marks. And of course, a floor without edger marks is one of the things that sets apart the true professional from the novice. As with grit selection for the belt sander, we want to start with a grit that is aggressive enough without being overly aggressive. This can vary depending on the floor condition, wood species, and other factors. Test a starting grit with a couple short passes and adjust up or down as necessary. Applying the soft side of a Velcro strap to the base of the edger is an easy and effective way to protect trim work from bumps and scratches while edging. Clocking refers to how you turn the edger during use. Whether you're edging along open walls or along butt-in walls, you need to know where and how the edger is cutting. You can gauge the aggressiveness of the edger by knowing its cut point in relation to the grain of the wood and clocking the edger accordingly. Understanding this concept is crucial to quality edging. Be sure not to grind the edger through corners. This will create a dig or ski slope in the floor that is difficult to remove. Instead, edge and feather up to the corner, then pick up the edger and move it to the other side. Feather it straight back close to the corner and quickly work away. Another method is to feather swing the edger through the corner area, but not lingering. This helps to open up the finish and stain in those areas, which should make your scraping process easier. Working in short sections with the edger perpendicular to the wall, start from the field or sanded area and work toward the wall, moving the edger from side to side in wide sweeping motions. When the first section is cleanly sanded, move to your right and repeat the process. Change the clocking of the edger to cut cross grain or with the grain as needed. In some cases, cutting cross grain on the first cut is better for flattening the floor and removing old finish and stain. Then edging with the grain on your final cut to minimize the chance of leaving any edger marks. The most common method used for edging butt-end walls is the J-turn method. Working cross grain, move the edger side to side to flatten and remove old stain and finish. Then clock the edger to align the cut with the grain and move in slow clockwise oval motions. If done correctly, this method will leave much fewer scratches to clean up later. A bright work light placed at a low angle can also be a great help in seeing any scratches left from edging, and also helps to reveal sander streaks or chatter marks left from the belt sander. The floor should always be thoroughly vacuumed in between cuts to remove any stray grit. A 14-inch horsehair brush is ideal for this task, as it cleans out seams, end joints, and soft grain areas much better than felt tools, which tend to simply push piles of debris around. When vacuuming, work in a path similar to the belt sander. Move back and forth in the same path, then overlap about 25% on each pass, always working towards the wall. After the floor has been sanded to raw wood, it can sometimes be difficult on the next cut to identify where you've been, especially on floors with lots of rooms, corners, and other detail areas. Taking a carpenter's pencil or lumber crayon and quickly marking the entire floor will help you easily spot any areas you might miss on your next cut. The reason we perform multiple sanding cuts is to remove deeper scratches from previous cuts, creating a smoother and finer surface for our finishing system. Sanding paper comes in these standard grit progressions. An important rule to remember in grit selection is to never skip more than one level of grit. For example, if you used a 40 grit on your first cut, skip 50 and go to 60 for the second, then skip 80 and move up to 100 for the third cut. Proper grit sequence creates a smooth, even surface that is the ideal base for stain, sealer, and finish application. To get ready for the second cut, first make sure the power cord is disconnected. Quickly check the drum, travel roller, and wheels. Vacuum or remove any debris or buildup if needed. As you move to finer abrasive grits, you will need to back off on the drum pressure and walk slightly faster when sanding. This will eliminate walking chatter and give you a smoother surface. Just like on the first cut, sand the full length of the starting wall to create a fresh path. Turn the machine around and begin sanding across the room, this time working in straight lines as opposed to a slight angle. Work 1/3 of the room moving towards the far wall. Sand the full length of the far wall, turn around and work back over the remaining 2/3, overlapping your transition area. Recall that on the first cut we sanded 2/3 of the field, then the other third. By switching the transition areas between the first and second cut, we are able to blend the two cuts together smoothly. Many times, even if cutting the floor with 3 grits on the sander, we can stick with just 2 cuts on the edger. This is due to the fact that the scratches from an edger are easier to see than those from the sander, so we can see if our final edger grit is taking out all the previous scratches from the heavier grits. If the floor was really rough, damaged, or had years and years of finish buildup, then it's still probably best to 3-cut with your edger. Otherwise, a 2-cut will work a high percentage of the time. The floor should be thoroughly vacuumed between cuts to assure that any stray grit has been removed. This is especially important before filler application, since stray grit and wood dust will mix with the filler, making it thick and difficult to work with. A professional wood floor craftsman knows when to fill and when not to fill open seams and cracks in the floor. Since wood typically expands in the spring and summer, seasonal gaps that occur during the drier winter heating season should be left alone to leave room for the wood to move back when humidity levels increase in the warmer months. Filling seasonal cracks in the winter can lead to that same filler being pushed back out in the spring and summer as the flooring expands, leaving raised ribbons of filler along the affected board seams. Another potential issue when filling seasonal cracks is called edge crush. Because the filler tends to dry harder than the wood, as the flooring expands against it, the wood grain on the edges of the board seam may be permanently compressed. This causes an even bigger crack the following winter when the wood contracts and the filler crumbles into the enlarged seam. Different colors of filler may be needed to match the wood species. Occasionally, several different colors may be needed for the same species, such as hickory. To fill large knot holes or very dark defects, extra color may be added to the filler or tinted epoxy may be used. Wood floor filler is used to fill slight cracks and gaps in the floor, and also to fill and close off grain in open pore species. Larger cracks should be repaired using the splinter technique. First, stir the filler to ensure all components are mixed well. Use a putty knife to apply small amounts of filler only where it's needed, usually on end joints, knot holes, and other minor defects. You may want to add some water to the filler to make it easier to spread. Don't exceed 1 cup per gallon though, because too much water will cause sagging and cracking, which you'll then have to fill again. Work the product into the seams and grain at a 45-degree angle to the flooring. This will prevent the filler from following the trowel back out of the floor. Press down with the trowel to minimize any filler left on top. Sanding off excess filler can be very messy and difficult. Make several passes over the same area to work the filler into the floor. Fill the entire floor, including the edges. Any skip spots will show through the finish in your final product, particularly with open pore species. As you work your filler puddle across the floor, the filler will thicken as it picks up wood dust. Do not put this thickened product back in the bucket. Throw it out and pour fresh filler for the next section. With sufficient airflow, filler should be allowed to dry overnight. Although the surface might feel dry after a few hours, the filler in deeper cracks and seams can still be wet. Sanding over wet filler will often pull it out of the floor, leaving you to fill it again. For the final cut, make sure to use the same type of abrasive on both the sander and the edger, though grit choice may be different on each machine. Again, base your grit selection on what you used for the previous cut. If you used a 60 grit, skip 80 and use 100. If you used a 50 grit, skip 60 and use 80. Remember to never skip more than one level of grit. Quickly check the drum and roller while changing the belt, and if needed, vacuum off any debris. After changing the belt, adjust the drum pressure to the fine setting. Some professionals like to edge before sanding on the final cut, pulling their edger marks into the field where the sander can remove them. Others prefer to minimize edging by sanding first, getting as close to the wall as possible. Either of these methods will work, so go with whatever works best for you. First, sand the full length of the starting wall with the right side of the machine toward the wall. Turn the machine around and work half the length of the room, working across the room towards the far wall. Sand the full length of the far wall, then turn and sand the remaining half of the room, overlapping your transition area. Notice how we move the transition area again, this time to the middle of the room. Staggering our transition areas between cuts helps us to avoid any unevenness showing through in our final product. Just as we back off on the drum pressure for our final sander cut, we want to flatten and widen the cut on our edger to minimize and soften scratches on our final edging. To do this, adjust and lower the chassis on the rear wheels. Good edging technique is most important for the final pass. Any edger marks left after this point will need to be removed manually later on, which can cost you valuable time on the job. Control and clock the edger so that any scratches you leave are going with the grain as much as possible. Certain species of wood might require going all the way to 120 grit in order to minimize visible scratches. These are usually the very light or dark colored and very dense wood species, such as maple, Brazilian cherry, and ipe.